Welcome to your personal deep dive. Today, we're going to be kind of tracing the philosophical footsteps of Immanuel Kant, a thinker, whose ideas kind of continue to echo through, intellectual history.
Yeah.
So we've got Karl Ameriks' book, Kantian Subjects, as our guide for today.
Okay.
And we're going to see how Kant's successors,
Followers.
yeah, from Hegel to Holderlin, really grappled with his legacy.
Yeah.
Sometimes building upon it, sometimes wrestling with it, but always engaging in this really vibrant philosophical conversation.
Yeah, what's so fascinating is that Kant's influence wasn't limited to just his own time.
Right.
He's a cornerstone of modern philosophy, but his ideas really reverberated through movements like German idealism, reaching even into the 20th century.
Wow.
It's like he set off this chain reaction of thought that continues even to this day.
Okay, so we're talking about a philosophical legacy that's spanning centuries here. Yeah. But let's be honest, for those of us who aren't philosophy professors, Kant can be a little intimidating.
He can be pretty dense.
Yeah, known for dense writing, complex ideas.
Yeah.
Where do we even begin to unpack all of this?
Well, Ameriks provides a really great entry point.
Okay.
And one of the first things he tackles is this common misconception about Kant.
Okay.
The idea that he was a subjectivist.
Okay.
The kind of thinker who believes reality is all in our heads.
So it's not just that I see the world through rose-colored glasses.
Right.
It's that the world itself is rose-colored because my mind makes it so.
Right, exactly. That's kind of
That's pretty radical.
It is radical, and it's a misreading of Kant.
Okay.
What Ameriks emphasizes is that Kant was actually deeply concerned with objective structures in how we know, will, and feel.
Okay.
He didn't believe that the mind just invents reality.
Okay.
Instead, he argued that our minds have inherent ways of structuring experience, and those structures have a kind of objective validity.
Okay, so our minds aren't creating reality from scratch.
Right.
But they are shaping how we experience it.
Exactly.
How do we know these structures aren't just arbitrary?
Right.
How do we get outside of our own heads to confirm their objectivity?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
To get a handle on this, we need to understand Kant's three major works, often referred to as the three critiques.
Okay.
These are like the pillars of his philosophical system.
Three critiques. That sounds pretty intense.
It is a lot.
Can you give us a quick rundown of what each one's about?
Absolutely. Think of the critique of pure reason as a deep dive into the workings of your intellect, how your mind processes information and makes sense of the world.
Okay.
The critique of practical reason is all about your will.
Okay.
The faculty that drives your actions and guides your moral choices. And finally, the critique of judgment explores your feeling.
Okay.
How you experience things like beauty, sublimity.
And the purposefulness of nature.
Wow, that's quite a philosophical balancing act.
It is.
So Kant is saying that to understand ourselves and the world, we need to understand how these three faculties, intellect, will, and feeling, work together.
Exactly.
Are they really separate, or do they kind of influence each other?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it gets to the heart of Kant's philosophy. He saw these faculties as distinct but interconnected.
Okay.
He argued that while reason sets our ultimate goals, it's motivated and informed by our feelings and intellect.
Okay.
So it's not just cold, hard logic.
Right.
There's a dynamic interplay between these different parts of ourselves.
But if reason is supposed to be our guide, how do we know we're not just following our own subjective whims?
Right.
How does Kant ensure that reason leads us to objective, universal truths?
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to morality.
That's a key challenge.
Yeah.
And it leads us to one of Kant's most controversial ideas.
Okay.
The fact of reason.
Okay. He argued that we have an immediate, intuitive awareness of a moral law within us.
Okay.
It's not something we deduce through logic, but a fundamental principle that we experience directly.
Okay.
Like an inner compass.
Inner compass. I like that.
Yeah.
So it's not about proving the moral law exists scientifically.
Right.
But recognizing its presence within ourselves.
Exactly.
But doesn't that open the door to different interpretations?
Right.
What if my inner compass points me in a different direction than yours.
That's where Kant's concept of the categorical imperative comes in.
Okay.
It's a way of testing our moral maxims,
Okay.
the principles behind our actions.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is that for an action to be truly moral, it has to be something that everyone could rationally will as a universal law, regardless of their personal desires or inclinations.
So it's about finding moral principles that aren't just good for me, but good for everyone.
Exactly.
Principles that could apply universally. That sounds pretty demanding.
It is demanding.
Yeah.
But that's the nature of true morality for Kant.
Okay.
It's not about pursuing our own happiness at the expense of others, but about acting in a way that respects the inherent dignity and worth of all rational beings.
So we're talking about a morality grounded in reason.
Yeah.
A morality that transcends individual whims and desires.
Right.
It's not just about feeling good, but about doing good.
Exactly.
About aligning our actions with universal principles.
Mm-hmm.
But did Kant's successors buy into all of this?
That's a great question.
Did they just take his ideas and run with them, or did they challenge and reinterpret them?
This is where the philosophical story takes a fascinating turn.
Okay.
The period after Kant saw what's called the historical turn.
The historical turn.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thinkers began to see philosophy not just as a system of abstract ideas, but as a product of history, evolving over time, shaped by its own genealogy.
So instead of just taking ideas at face value, they started digging into their roots.
Yeah.
Seeing how they changed and were influenced by what came before.
Exactly.
Kind of like tracing the evolution of a species.
Yeah.
But for ideas instead of animals.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this genealogical approach became a hallmark of post-Kantian thought.
Okay.
It's like understanding a family tree.
Yeah.
You can't fully know a person without understanding their ancestry, their relationships, the whole web of interconnectedness.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So let's start tracing this philosophical family tree.
Okay.
First up, we have Hegel.
Yeah.
One of Kant's most famous successors.
Right.
And I hear a bit of a critic. What were Hegel's main issues with Kant's philosophy?
Well, Hegel was a brilliant but complex thinker.
Okay.
And his critique of Kant is multifaceted. But one key point of contention was Kant's notion of things in themselves.
Okay.
Things in themselves.
Remember, for Kant,
these represent reality as it exists independent of our perception.
Okay.
Hegel worried that this created an unbridgeable gap between our minds and the world, ultimately leading to a kind of skepticism about whether we can ever truly know reality.
Okay, so Hegel is pushing back against the idea that there's this unknowable realm beyond our experience.
Exactly.
He's saying, wait a minute.
Yeah.
If we can't know things in themselves, doesn't that undermine the whole project of philosophy?
Exactly.
The search for truth and understanding.
Exactly. And to address this concern, Hegel developed his own ambitious philosophical system, one aimed at overcoming this gap between mind and world. He proposed a concept called absolute knowledge, which is this idea that ultimately the mind and reality are not separate, but rather aspects of a single unified whole.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's a pretty radical idea.
It is.
It's like saying the universe is thinking itself through us.
Right.
And we're not just observers, but participants in this grand cosmic drama.
Yeah, exactly.
But how does Ameriks respond to Hegel's critique of Kant?
Right.
Does he think Hegel's got a point?
Well, Ameriks doesn't shy away from this debate.
Okay.
He argues that Kant's concept of appearances as ideal doesn't negate their reality.
Okay.
It simply means they are not unconditioned or absolute.
Okay.
In other words, they are real, but they are also shaped by the way our minds structure experience.
So it's not that our minds create reality out of thin air.
Right.
But they do play an active role in how we experience and understand it.
Exactly.
It's like saying the world provides the raw materials, but our minds provide the framework, the lens through which we perceive those materials.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
And this interplay between mind and world is at the heart of Kant's philosophy.
Okay.
It's a nuanced position that acknowledges both the objectivity of reality and the subjectivity of our experience.
This is all starting to make sense, but I have to admit, it's pretty heady stuff.
It is.
Yeah.
It's complex.
It's making me realize just how complex and interconnected all of these philosophical ideas are.
It is complex, but that's part of the beauty of philosophy.
Yeah.
It challenges us to think deeply about the most fundamental questions of existence.
Yeah, and it's a journey that doesn't end with Kant.
Right?
Remember, we're tracing a whole lineage of ideas here.
Exactly.
A philosophical family tree with many branches.
Yeah.
And I'm eager to explore those branches.
Yeah.
But for now,
yeah,
I think we need a moment to let all of this sink in.
Right.
You know, we've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
From the three critiques to the fact of reason,
Mm-hmm.
from things in themselves to the historical turn.
Yeah.
It's clear that Kant's legacy is far from simple.
Right.
And his successors had a lot to say about his ideas.
They did. And we've only just begun to scratch the surface.
Okay.
There's so much more to explore
Okay.
in the world of Kant and his philosophical heirs.
Okay.
We'll be back soon to continue our deep dives, so stay tuned.
Looking forward to it.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the intricate world of Immanuel Kant and his philosophical heirs.
Okay.
As we delve deeper into Ameriks' analysis, it becomes increasingly clear that understanding Kant requires a certain level of precision,
Right.
especially when it comes to terms like autonomy determination
Okay.
and even will itself.
I'm starting to realize that philosophy has its own language.
It does.
And Kant seems to be pushing the boundaries of that language even further.
He does.
Why is it so important to get these terms right?
Right.
Does it really change how we understand his philosophy?
It absolutely does.
Okay.
These terms are loaded with meaning, and if we misinterpret them, we can end up with a distorted view of Kant's thought. Take the concept of self-determination, for example.
Okay.
It's not always as straightforward as it sounds.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
How can self-determination be anything other than, well, determining yourself?
Well, Kant distinguishes between two types of determination.
Okay.
Epistemological and causal.
Okay.
Think of it this way. When you determine that a surface appears warm to the touch, you've gained knowledge about it.
Okay.
That's epistemological determination.
So it's about learning something about an object.
Right.
Observing its properties.
Exactly.
You're not necessarily changing the object, just gaining knowledge about it.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yeah.
But what about causal determination?
Okay.
How is that different?
Causal determination is about actually bringing something about in the world.
Okay.
Making something happen.
Okay.
So if you actively heat up that surface, you've causally determined its warmth. You've directly influenced the object and changed its state.
That's a really helpful distinction.
Yeah.
So epistemological is about observing.
Right.
While causal is about acting.
Exactly.
About causing a change.
Yeah.
But how does all this relate to Kant's idea of the will?
Okay.
I thought the will was just about our desires.
Right, yeah,
what we want to do.
But for Kant, the will is much more nuanced than that.
Okay.
It's not just about our fleeting whims or impulses.
Okay.
He distinguishes between Willkür, which is more like our arbitrary choices driven by instinct or desire, and will.
Hold on, I need to write this down.
Okay.
Willkür is about arbitrary choices.
Right.
And will is?
Will refers to the capacity to act according to reason and moral principles.
Okay.
It's the part of us that can step back from our immediate desires and make choices based on a higher moral law.
Okay.
This concept of will is essential to Kant's understanding of freedom.
So it's not just about doing whatever we want.
Right.
But about acting in accordance with a moral law.
Right. Exactly.
That we discover through reason.
Exactly.
That sounds pretty demanding.
It is.
Where's the freedom in that?
That's the paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
For Kant, true freedom doesn't mean being a slave to our desires.
Okay.
But rather aligning our will with the universal moral law.
Okay.
A law discovered through reason, not imposed by external authority.
So we're free when we choose to act.
Right.
In a way that everyone could rationally will as a universal law.
Exactly.
But wouldn't that lead to a pretty restrictive society where everyone's always following the rules?
Right.
Where's the room for individuality and spontaneity?
That's a valid concern.
Yeah.
And it's something Kant's critics often point to.
Okay.
But remember, for Kant, the moral law isn't arbitrary.
Okay.
It's grounded in reason.
Okay.
In the very nature of rational beings.
Okay.
And it's precisely this ability to act according to reason.
Okay.
To choose the moral path even when it's difficult, that makes us truly free.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all fits together.
Yeah.
But didn't Kant also talk about something called the highest good?
He did?
How does that fit into this idea of freedom and morality?
The highest good is another fascinating and complex concept for Kant.
Okay.
It's the ultimate goal that reason strives for.
Okay.
And it involves a combination of two things.
Okay.
Virtue,
Okay.
which is acting in accordance with the moral law.
Okay.
And happiness,
Okay.
which is the fulfillment of our desires and inclinations.
So it's not enough to just be good.
Right.
We also want to be happy.
We do.
Right.
Yes.
But aren't those two things often in conflict?
They are. That's
Sometimes doing the right thing means sacrificing our own happiness.
a tension that has puzzled philosophers for centuries.
Yeah.
Kant believed that the highest good was possible,
Right.
but not necessarily achievable in this life alone.
Okay.
He argued that we need to postulate the existence of God and an afterlife to make sense of the possibility of achieving both virtue and happiness.
So God becomes a kind of cosmic guarantor.
Yeah.
Ensuring that our moral efforts are ultimately rewarded with happiness.
Right.
It's like a cosmic balancing of the scales.
Yeah.
But isn't that relying on faith rather than reason?
It's true that this aspect of Kant's philosophy does rely on certain postulates that go beyond the realm of pure reason.
Okay.
But for Kant, these postulates weren't arbitrary leaps of faith.
Okay.
They were necessary conditions for making sense of our moral experience,
Like,
for justifying our belief in the possibility of the highest good.
okay, so even though we can't prove these postulates empirically,
Right.
they provide a framework for understanding our moral striving,
Exactly.
for believing that our efforts to be good
Yeah.
won't ultimately be in vain.
They give us hope
Yeah.
that virtue and happiness aren't mutually exclusive,
Okay.
that a world where goodness is rewarded is at least possible.
This is all incredibly thought-provoking.
It is.
But it also raises some questions for me.
Okay.
For instance, if Kant rejected a mind-based ontology
Mm-hmm.
and believed in things in themselves,
Right.
how could he reconcile those two positions?
Right.
It seems like we might be running into a little bit of a philosophical paradox here.
It's a good observation
Yeah.
and a common point of contention among Kant scholars.
Okay.
But let me offer a possible way of understanding this apparent contradiction.
Okay.
Remember,
Yeah.
Kant's focus wasn't on denying the existence of reality outside our minds.
Okay.
Instead, he was trying to understand the limits of our knowledge
Mm.
and how our minds shape our experience of the world.
So it's not about whether things in themselves exist,
Right.
but about how we can access them.
Exactly.
Are we forever trapped within the confines of our own minds?
Right.
Or is there a way to bridge the gap
Right.
between our perceptions and the world as it truly is?
That's the central question.
Yeah.
For Kant,
Yeah.
we can never know things in themselves directly,
Okay.
only through the lens of our own perception and understanding.
Okay.
This doesn't mean that things in themselves don't exist,
Okay.
but it does mean that our knowledge of them
Okay.
is always mediated by our own mental faculties.
So we're back to this idea that our minds aren't creating reality,
Right.
but they are playing an active role
Exactly.
in shaping how we experience it.
Exactly.
It's like we're looking through a window
Yeah.
that filters the light,
Right.
shaping the colors and contours of what we see.
That's a great analogy.
Okay.
It captures the essence of Kant's philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
He shifts the focus from the object of knowledge
Okay.
to the subject,
Okay.
the knower,
Okay.
and how their mind structures their experience of the world.
It's a profound shift in perspective.
It is.
It's like realizing that the map is not the territory,
Right.
but it's still a useful tool
Yeah.
for navigating that territory. But didn't some of Kant's successors take issue with this focus on the subject?
They did.
Didn't they want to get back to a more objective view of reality?
They did.
Okay.
And that's what makes the post-Kantian period so exciting.
Okay.
It's a period of intense philosophical debate
Okay.
where different thinkers are grappling with Kant's legacy,
Okay.
pushing his ideas in new directions,
Yeah,
and sometimes even rebelling against them.
So it's not just a case of following in Kant's footsteps,
Right.
but of carving out their own paths,
Exactly.
forging new trails through the philosophical landscape.
Yeah.
I'm really curious to hear more about these different approaches.
Yeah.
But for now, I
Yeah.
think we need to take a short break
Okay.
and let all this philosophical brilliance sink in.
Don't worry. Our deep dive isn't over yet.
Okay.
We've only just begun to explore the rich and complex legacy of Kant and his successors.
Welcome back to our final segment of this deep dive into Kant and his successors. One thing that's become increasingly clear throughout our exploration
Yeah.
is that philosophy, especially in the post-Kantian era, is deeply intertwined with history.
Yeah.
It's like these thinkers were saying, hey, to understand where we are philosophically, we need to understand how we got here.
That's a great way to put it. This historical awareness, this genealogical approach, became a defining feature of post-Kantian philosophy.
Okay.
They weren't just interested in abstract systems,
Right.
but in how those systems evolved, were challenged, transformed over time.
It's almost like they were tracing the lineage of ideas.
Yeah.
Seeing how they branched out, mutated.
Right.
And sometimes even led to entirely new philosophical species.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
And this focus on history wasn't just about looking back.
Right.
It was about understanding the present.
Okay.
And shaping the future of philosophical inquiry.
So it wasn't just about dusty old books and dead philosophers, but a living conversation that was still relevant to their own time.
Yeah.
And as we've seen, even to ours.
Precisely. And that's what makes the historical turn so fascinating. It shows how philosophy is not some isolated, timeless pursuit, but a dynamic engagement with the challenges and possibilities of each era.
And this brings us back to Ameriks' concept of historical appropriation. Right?
Yes.
The idea that philosophers weren't just copying Kant, but actively engaging with his ideas, reinterpreting them and making them their own.
Yeah.
They were building on the foundation he provided, but they weren't afraid to renovate, to add their own unique touches.
Exactly. Yeah. They saw Kant's work not as a finished system, but as a starting point, a springboard for their own philosophical explorations.
That's like inheriting a house.
Right.
A beautifully crafted structure with good bums.
Yeah.
But then deciding to make it your own. Right. Maybe you knock down a wall here, add a skylight there, modernize the kitchen.
Yeah.
You're respecting the original architecture.
Right.
But also adapting it to your own needs and vision.
That's such a great analogy.
Yeah.
And it highlights the creativity and dynamism of this period in philosophy.
Okay.
Think about Hegel, for example.
Okay.
He took Kant's ideas about reason and reality and pushed them in a radically different direction.
Okay.
Developing his own grand system that emphasized the unity of subject and object.
It's like Hegel walked into that Kantian house and said, I appreciate the craftsmanship, but I'm going to knock down some walls.
Yeah.
And create a completely open floor plan. Right. A space where mind and world flow seamlessly together.
I love it.
Yeah.
And then you have someone like Schelling, who, while still deeply influenced by Kant, was also critical of what he saw as an overemphasis on pure reason.
Okay.
Schelling wanted to bring philosophy back down to earth.
Okay. To engage more directly with the concrete lived experience of reality.
So maybe Schelling decided to add a sunroom onto that Kantian house.
Right.
A space filled with plants and natural light.
Yeah.
A place where you could feel the pulse of the living world.
It's a perfect image.
Yeah.
And what's so fascinating is that both Hegel and Schelling, despite their different approaches, were deeply indebted to Kant.
Okay.
They were appropriating his ideas, transforming them, but always building upon the foundation he laid.
And it's not just Hegel and Schelling.
Right.
We see this same spirit of appropriation in other thinkers, like Holderlin, the poet philosopher, who explored Kantian themes of freedom and morality through the lens of art and imagination and the Romantics, while embracing the subjective and aesthetic dimensions of experience. We're still grappling with Kant's fundamental insights about the nature of reason and the human condition. It's a testament to the enduring power of Kant's legacy. He didn't just give us a set of answers, but a set of questions, a framework for thinking about the most fundamental aspects of human experience. Reason, morality, freedom, the nature of reality itself.
And those questions continue to resonate today.
They do.
Even as we move further away from Kant's own historical context.
Right.
His ideas, like those ripples in a pond, keep spreading outward, influencing new generations of thinkers, and challenging us to grapple with the big questions of life.
And that's what makes this deep dive so valuable. It's not just about learning about Kant, but about understanding how his ideas have shaped the philosophical landscape and continue to provoke us to think critically and creatively about the world.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of Kant and his successors.
Yeah.
What are the key takeaways?
Yeah.
What should we, as curious listeners, walk away with?
I think one key takeaway is that philosophy isn't a static, monolithic thing.
Okay.
It's an ongoing conversation, a dynamic process of questioning, exploring and reimagining the possibilities of human thought.
Okay.
And Kant, with his profound and challenging ideas, played a pivotal role in shaping that conversation.
Another key takeaway is that engaging with philosophy isn't about memorizing doctrines or finding the one right answer.
Right.
It's about opening ourselves up to new ways of thinking.
Exactly.
Grappling with complex questions.
Yeah.
And finding our own place in this grand intellectual lineage that stretches back centuries.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think the most important takeaway is that Kant's legacy is still very much alive today. His ideas continue to challenge us, inspire us, and provoke us to think deeply about ourselves and the world.
So what's your take on Kant's enduring legacy? Where do you see his influence in the world today? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.